Hi, everyone. This is Melissa Oak, Sales Manager with Strategyn. Thank you so much for joining us for today's webinar, Turn Customer Input into Innovation, led by Strategyn's founder and CEO, Tony Ulwick. Today's topic was an easy one for us to decide as we're hearing more and more from our clients, both new and recurring, that they want an efficient way to breathe life into existing data assets. We've successfully brought this approach into many client organizations and are excited to share with you our thoughts around the approach today. We'll break for questions a couple times during the presentation and after as well, so please feel free to submit them throughout the presentation. And now I'd like to introduce Tony Ulwick, Strategyn's founder and CEO.
Well, thanks, Melissa. And I want to thank everyone for joining us today. We appreciate you taking the time out. I think we all share a common passion here, and that is to create products that address unmet customer needs. And that's really what innovation is all about. And in order to innovate effectively, we have to come up with ideas, and we also have to understand the customer's needs. And the goal here, of course, is to come up with a way that we can execute the process in the most efficient manner. And this is something Strategyn's worked on for the last couple of decades. So what I wanted to describe is the approach that we're using to help companies take the information they currently have and have been collecting over the years and translate it into something that's more useful. And we hear from a lot of our clients that they've spent years collecting data, they have lots of insights, but they don't feel like they have a true, deep understanding of their customers' needs. So this webinar today is designed to help shed some light on this issue. So we do know that customer insights are certainly plentiful. We hear this from all our clients. They get thousands of inputs every single day from customers. They're really inundated with customer insights. So these inputs are coming from a variety of sources. Some are formal sources, some are informal. But having these insights is really not an issue. Getting them is not an issue. And also, there are pockets of knowledge that exist within companies. Many of our clients have research organizations or research teams that really focus on getting customer needs or getting a better understanding of the customer through ethnographic research or a whole variety of forms of research. So there are pockets of knowledge that exist. There are people within your organization that have some insight into what the needs are. And I find this interesting. We did some research in a previous webinar, in fact, and we asked, how satisfied are you with your ability to uncover the customer's insights? And the answer's very satisfied. 72% said 4 or 5, and very satisfied with their ability to understand their customers' insights, which is interesting. So gathering the insights really isn't the issue. The issue comes with then using those insights and translating them into something more valuable. And so what we find is that while there are pockets of knowledge that exist around the corporation, the needs are not complete, they're not organized, they're not shared. So I like using this image here because I think it represents exactly what's happening. All the pieces exist within the organization, and collectively, the organization probably knows all the customer's needs. But there isn't any one individual or one organization that knows all the customer's needs. So all the pieces are there, but they're not being shared, they're not being used effectively across the organization. One of the reasons for this is needs come in a variety of formats, right? And I think companies have come to accept inputs from customers in all these different forms. When we talk to our clients, they talk about customers' needs, their exciters, the delighters, the must-haves, the wants, the latent needs, the unarticulated needs, as if all these words mean the same sort of thing. And I think this is where the problem begins, is that the properties of a valid need really aren't defined. A second problem is that there's no structure for these needs. And I love using this analogy. Could you imagine, in the programming world, trying to create a software application, if the software developers couldn't agree on the language they were going to use to create the application? And they all just typed in whatever they wanted in their own form, their own words, in their own interpretation with their own syntax, and hope that an application would pop out the other end. Of course, that would result in disaster, as it does here. It's really no different. I think the analogy works well. Sure, companies are getting lots of customer insights. They're getting all the right words. They're hearing all these different types of information that you see over here on the right, like, I want my journey to be exactly the way I like it, or it's got to be reliable, durable, or I want to be perceived positively by my peers, or so on. All these are very different types of statements, but they're all accepted inputs into the innovation process. And of course, this is part of the problem. If we can't agree on what the structure of a need statement is and what the characteristics of a good need are, then it's going to be really difficult to come up with solutions that address unmet customer needs. I put this slide together because I think it reflects a really strange dynamic. And when you see it, you kind of realize how crazy this approach really is. These are the dynamics that are typically called out in a needs gathering exercise. It's unclear to anyone involved what inputs are being sought. So here's what happens. The company sits down with customers to understand their needs, but they don't know what kind of inputs they're looking for. Of course, the customers don't know what kind of inputs the company's looking for either. So what they do is they're going to offer up their inputs and requirements and needs in a language that's convenient to them, the customer. So with all these different inputs, tens of pages, 300 pages of ethnographic work all laid out in front of you, companies are going to handpick those nuggets, the things that they think are the needs, or the things that are valuable inputs into guiding the innovation process. Of course, if everyone's going through that and handpicking the things that they think are relevant, there's going to be inconsistencies that are going to emerge in the structure and the content and the format of those statements. And that's why in the previous slide you could see all these, I'll just go back there, all these different statements are all acceptable. They're viewed as inputs into the innovation process, even though they all look very different meanings, different content, different purposes, and so on. And because of that, then of course the companies can't agree on what the needs are. So you have marketing thinking there's a certain set of needs. The sales team has some disagreement and believes that there's other sets of needs. The development team disagrees with both, and R&D has another opinion. And because they can't all agree, these insights exist, but they don't really help the organization. I think this is often the state of what is happening in companies as they try to understand customer needs. So what we want to do here today is to fix that, or to help you fix that. And the goal is to show you how to take these inputs that you currently have and translate them into something valuable, an asset that the organization can use over the long term to help it understand the needs and figure out which are unmet and create products and services that satisfy those needs to a greater degree. So in order to do that, we need to go down three different paths. The first is we need to know what characteristics and properties a need statement must possess. That's first and foremost. Then we must agree on what a need statement is. What is this language of a need? And lastly, once we know what that language is, and we all agree that we're using the same application, the development language, if you will, we can then translate what information we currently have into this format and make it usable across the organization. So that is the goal. So let's get started on how we approach this. The first is the characteristics and property of the need statement. And we're going to break this into the three sections. So we'll go need characteristics, the need structure, and then we'll talk about how to translate what you have into this new structure. So again, the need characteristics first. So the way I like thinking about this is we are thinking about innovation as an equation, trying to come up with solutions that address unmet customer needs. So one side of the equation, you have all these possible technologies, ideas, features that you could pull together in some fashion to satisfy some set of unmet needs. Now, I like thinking of this as an equation because when you think about it as an equation, you can start applying some basic rules of math that say in any equation, you have to have constants and variables in order to solve the equation. And I think you probably remember this from back in algebra class, right? You see that quadratic equation, you see 2x plus y equals 3, you can see what the constants are and variables are. Now, the reason that was important is because if you can separate the constants from the variables, you can end up solving the equation. There's a very systematic way to go through it and solve x for x in terms of y, and simply go through and solve the equation. Now, this is perfect, right? We don't have to guess. It's a formula to make this happen. Now, what often happens, however, is that companies confuse a constant with a variable. In other words, the variable in the equation is the solution, and the other variable in the equation are the needs. So if you have needs that vary and solutions that vary in the equation, you can't solve the equation, and you end up guessing at the solution. And you may have tried this back in high school days where you see that equation sitting in and you say, well, let me just plug in numbers and see how this works. Let me try x is 3 and y is 1. Well, that solve the equation? No, that didn't work. Let me try x is 2 and y is 2. Will that work? No, that didn't work either. And you could spend hours just guessing at different solutions, hoping that you get the right solution. The problem with that, of course, is you may never guess the right solution. So you could spend lots of time guessing at all these different solutions and never get the right one. And this is what happens in the innovation process. Companies spend lots of time guessing at the solutions, hoping they address unmet needs, when in fact they do not. And this is what leads to lower success rates. So when we think about the characteristics of a need statement, the very first thing we think about is that it has to be a constant in the equation. So it has to be something that it can be solved against. It's got to be stable over time. And so when we start a little bit later defining what an outcome statement is, we'll highlight this once again. So this is one very, very key characteristic. It's got to be constant in the equation. The second piece is that a need is not a solution. Now, I know this sounds very simple, but despite how simple it sounds, we hear these arguments all the time that says, if you would just leave it to the customer, they would just ask for a faster horse. Okay, so if you would to go down that path, we would have to say that you're confusing needs with solutions. Yes, it's certainly true that customers don't know what solutions they want. It's true that people said they want a faster horse because they couldn't envision the automobile. But the horse and the automobile are solutions, they're not needs. And needing an automobile doesn't make the automobile a need. It's still a solution. And so confusing solutions with needs is a very common mistake, and that derails the innovation process because the constants and the variables are now all variables in the equation, right? So this is a very important characteristic. The need statement cannot be a solution, cannot refer to a solution. To emphasize this a little bit more, people say, people that know they needed a microwave. Well, again, a microwave is a solution. And then we hear the argument that customers have latent needs. These are needs that they don't know they have. Well, if you believe that customers have latent needs, again, you're confusing needs with solutions. Because customers don't have latent needs. They just don't know what solutions can satisfy their current needs. And again, customers aren't engineers and not scientists and not materials experts. It's true they couldn't articulate the concept of the microwave oven, but why should they? I mean, that's not their role in the innovation process. Their role in the innovation process is to provide information that helps you figure out how to create a better solution to help them prepare their meal. And of course, they know they're trying to minimize the time it takes to prepare a meal, the time it takes to clean up after cooking. You want to minimize the likelihood of overcooking. They know what they're trying to achieve. They just don't know the best way to go about and do it. Right? In other words, they know their needs. They don't know the solutions. So I just want to get through a couple of these issues because defining a need around a solution has led people to draw a lot of wrong conclusions, I believe, about what a need even is. Continue on the path of characteristics. Of course, a customer need has to be actionable. It's got to be something that the marketing team can take and use. It's got to be something that the sales team can take and use, the development team, the R&D team. It's got to be a useful input across the organization. And in order for it to be useful, we say it has to be measurable and it has to be controllable. So this is like a metric that you can measure and control. And just like any process where you're trying to apply a discipline, if you can measure it, you can control it. And that's what we're saying here. So we need to have a customer needs statement that is measurable. In other words, we can look at solution A and solution B and say that solution A is better than solution B at addressing that particular metric along a certain dimension. And it's got to be controllable in the design of the product or service. So it can't be something that's not controllable, like increased revenue, for example, is not a controllable need. It's an after-the-fact measure that results from the correct implementation of a solution. And the last characteristic I wanted to talk about is that a need statement has to be useful for a variety of purposes across the organization. It would be pretty difficult if marketing is working with one set of needs and the sales team is working with a different set of needs and development with another and R&D with another. Nothing would be coordinated and aligned. And the goal here is to coordinate and align the actions of all the parts of the organization around creating customer value. So these statements that come from customers have to be useful for all these different purposes, for identifying opportunities, for prioritizing what products are in the pipeline, for conducting competitive analysis to see which solutions are better than others, for messaging and positioning, for segmentation, for all these different purposes. So we're setting some tall standards here in terms of what we expect a need statement to be. But we've spent a couple of decades thinking about this exact question. What is the perfect need statement? What characteristics does it have to have in order for it to be useful as a tool to innovate in the organization? So I'll stop there for a second, Melissa, and see if there's any questions that have come up so far.
There are, thank you. So how do we know that we have the correct data for this process?
You mean internally?
Yes.
Okay, so how do you know that you have the correct data already inside the organization?
Mm-hmm.
Well, you probably do. And chances are, if you have spent time and effort, or your employees, a group of people have spent time and effort with with customers, and have attempted to understand their needs and have studied them, through ethnographic research, other observational techniques, and so on, that the knowledge probably exists within their heads. Is it written down? Probably not, and that's often the issue, right? What we're trying to do here is to get what is in the minds and the heads of the employees after they've talked to customers, and get it in the format that's useful. Now, if you're working in a brand new market and you don't have the experience of talking to customers about that new market yet, then the information may not exist within the organization. But let's assume, for the most part, trying to create better products like the ones you're already making, there's a good chance that knowledge already exists internally.
Okay, great. And one more question. Isn't it true that new needs emerge over time?
Great question. So do new needs emerge over time? Well, we're going to get into how we define a need in a second, but new needs can emerge over time, but they come in the form of new jobs that people are trying to execute, or adjacent jobs that people are trying to execute. So in many cases, these needs actually have existed for a long period of time, but the company doesn't focus on those needs because they haven't matured enough yet to start focusing on those adjacent needs. In other words, when we think about customers trying to create a product that helps their customer get an entire job done, many products just get pieces of a job done. And when they discover that there's other pieces of the job that the customer's trying to get done, they think that these are new needs. It's not really new. They're new to the company, but they've been existing with the customer for a good number of years.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Okay, so we'll continue on. So the second part of our discussion revolves around getting a structure around defining what a need actually is. It's getting this common language that could be used by marketing, development, sales, R&D, and the customer to describe what it is the customer is trying to achieve. So that's the key here. You need to create a language that makes sense for all parties involved, something that the customer will agree on and something that is useful across the organization. And this is where the jobs to be done thinking comes into play. We've talked about this a lot in the past. People buy products to get a job done. So what does that mean? What it means is that instead of focusing on understanding the product and asking customers about the product, we can ask customers about the job that they're trying to get done. And we can study that job as a process, and we can break down that process into its component parts, each step that they go through as they're trying to get a job done. And we can uncover the metrics that they're using to measure success and value as they're trying to get that job done. That, at a very high level, is why we focus on jobs to be done theory, because it allows us to create a need statement, these metrics that are measurable and controllable in the design of a product, and focus them on getting a job done better. And we're focusing on a stable job. That's one of the key components here. Products, of course, vary over time. They change yearly. Jobs don't. Jobs are around for years. Like we often use the listening to music example. People have been listening to music forever. Parents passing on life lessons to children. That job has gone on forever. And so these jobs are very stable over time. So remember we talked about innovation as an equation, and on one side of the equation we're looking at solutions, which are the variable. The other side of the equation are the needs, which are constants. If we can define the needs around the job the customer is trying to get done, we can begin to think about defining them as constants in the equation. So that's really one of the key reasons we see value in the jobs to be done approach, is because it gives us insight into how we can define a need that's a constant in the equation. Now, on this next slide here, I want to introduce a really important concept, and this is going to carry through into the rest of the conversation as well. When we think about customer needs, our clients often say, well, what customers are we talking about? And the answer, of course, is we're talking about all your customers. And rather than thinking about it as defining all the customers, let's think about the kinds of inputs we need from customers in order to create a better product or service. So when we start thinking about it like that, we realize that there are three different types of metrics or needs that we collect from customers. So one of them is around the job that the customer is trying to get done. This is the reason that the job executor is using the product, whether it's, again, someone listening to music or parents trying to pass life lessons on to their children. They're using a product to help them get that job done. And they can describe the functional metrics that are needed to understand the job they're trying to execute. And those functional metrics drive product and service innovation. So this is one critical part, right? So we're trying to uncover the metrics that are going to drive product and service innovation. They have to come from the people who are actually using the product to get the job done, because they're the ones with the understanding of the job they're trying to get done, right? That's one. The second is the financial metrics. We often see that people have to, of course, buy the product. And the buyer of a product may or may not be the user of a product. In B2C, we often see them being the same person, but in B2B applications, the buyer and the user are rarely the same person. We've also determined that the buyer uses a whole different set of criteria to decide what product and service they buy. They're going through the purchase process. They may have never even used the product to get the functional job done. So they're not the group of people we want to talk to understand the functional needs. They're the group of people we want to talk to understand the financial metrics that they use to decide if they want to buy product A or product B. So they're going through the job of buying the product. But buying a product is not a job per se. It's not the reason people are buying the product. They're not buying it to buy it. They're buying it to get a functional job done. So again, think about it from that perspective. The functional metrics come from the user. They have the insights needed to create a better product or service, the product innovation. The buyer understands the financial metrics that they're using to decide if they should buy product A over product B. And those insights drive business model innovation. The third piece are the customer experience or the customer journey elements. We often refer to them as the consumption chain metrics. People have to install the product, set it up, monitor it, maintain it, upgrade it, transport it. They're not buying the product to do all these things, but the product has to do all these things. So these are often other individuals. It could be the installer. It could be biomeds who are sterilizing a product in the medical space. So there's all sorts of ancillary people that need to be the focus of this customer journey because they're all part of the customer experience with the product. So when we think about innovation, let's think about it in these three big buckets. Again, product innovation, we need to focus on the core job of the user that's using the product to get a job done and understand the functional metrics. The financial metrics will come from the buyer, and the consumption metrics will come from somebody else, the installer, the biomed, so on. Okay, so this becomes very important because when we start thinking about how to structure the information you currently have, we're going to structure it into these buckets. So this is going to be the first filter, if you will, to take all that information that you currently have and start sorting it by who it belongs to. Is it a functional piece of input that's going to guide product innovation? Is it financial input that's going to guide business model innovation? Or is it something else that's going to guide improvements in the consumption chain? All right, so very important concept, very important part of the structure. So let's talk about what a need is. There's a lot of history here on the slide. We've spent a good 20 years trying to figure out what the perfect customer needs statement is. And I'll go through a few stories here. This dates back to my days at IBM, where we were trying to figure out back then what a customer need was. And as we started the Strategyn practice back in the early 90s, we used tools such as the House of Quality, QFD, if you guys are familiar with that, and if some of you are. And we would build these matrices. On the left side of the matrix, we'd have these, what we thought were customer needs. And then on top of the matrix, we would put these metrics that you could use to help drive innovation in the product. And the way we would define those metrics, we would say, these metrics have to be measurable and controllable in the design of the product. Well, after building dozens or even hundreds of these matrices, we got better at defining those metrics up on the top. And it occurred to us one day that, as we got really good at defining those metrics, there was no relationship or just one relationship between those metrics and the needs that were listed on the left-hand side of the matrix. You can read more about this we have a white paper out that's called Retire the House of Quality. I think that's it. You can get that on our website. But the important point here is we eventually realized that those metrics are actually the customer's needs. And if we could figure out and get those metrics directly from the customer, we could skip this whole step and trying to figure out this whole very front end of the House of Quality, if you will. And so that's how this started. And that was one of the first characteristics, right, was to figure out that we need something that's measurable and controllable in the design of a product, and we can define a metric that is. Then there's all the other criteria. It's got to be stable over time, free from solutions, usable across function. Over the years, we created a statement that looks like what you see here, a statement with the direction of improvement, something that you can measure and control as a metric, the object of control, and the contextual clarifier. It's just the context around which you're trying to achieve that outcome, if you will. So we call these statements desired outcomes, hence outcome-driven innovation. And the goal here, of course, is to understand all these metrics and innovate around these outcomes so that you're satisfying them to a greater and greater degree. Now, over the years, we've developed an interesting set of rules that we follow. Again, this is the language, right? It's a syntax that we follow in order to get these statements perfect. So some of you may know that we worked with Microsoft in the early 2000s, and we did about 45 different projects with them during this time frame. We worked with their corporate market research group. And during this time, we did a lot of experimentation around testing these outcome statements. We we tested different variations of the introduction: minimize, reduce, decrease, prevent, eliminate, increase, maximize, and so on. We tested different metrics: time, likelihood, frequency, number, amount. And we tested different objects of control, different formats with contextual clarifier, without, all that sort of thing. And so we did a lot of experimentation to figure out what statements best resonate with the customers who are rating them for importance and satisfaction, and which ones work best as inputs into the marketing, development, R&D process. So through that fine balance, we came up with a language that looks like this. So there's lots of reason why we state them in this fashion. And minimize is the term that we settled on in the end. Time, likelihood are the two key metrics that we use. And let me explain why we do that. In order to get a job done better, better means faster, more predictably, and with higher output and throughput. So you're trying to get rid of things that go wrong in the process, things that take time, things that aren't predictable, things that are driving waste and inefficiency. So you're trying to remove these things from the equation, if you will. So you're trying to minimize the time it takes to achieve something. You want to minimize the likelihood of bad things happening. And as a result, and we instruct our clients to think about it like this: if you just begin the translation exercise with the idea in mind that all these statements are going to begin with either minimize the time it takes to do something or minimize the likelihood of something bad happening, that you can really simplify this translation process. We've got other rules that we followed in here too. One of the key things here is that these statements have to be organized and stated in such a way that they don't confound the way it or other statements are prioritized in the survey. And this is really important. These statements are going to end up in a survey in front of customers, and customers have to prioritize them, have to be able to prioritize them for importance and satisfaction. If they can't do that, if they're ambiguous, if they have multiple meanings, then of course it's going to be highly problematic. So one of the other rules that we've put in here too is to watch out for adjectives and adverbs. And it's often the case where putting adjectives or adverbs in a statement leads you astray, and defining the adjective as part of the need is often a good thing to do. It's maybe part of the contextual clarifier. So again, lots of science going into what a customer need statement is. And once we agree on what a need statement is, we can begin using it to translate it into something valuable for the organization. So I'll stop here again for questions if we have any.
We do. Thank you. Have you discovered any other kinds of needs categories other than the three mentioned?
The three. So, yes. So, of course, there are emotional jobs that customers are trying to get done. And the way we use them in the equation is to, and I'll show that a little bit later, is to focus on satisfying the functional needs from a product standpoint and emotional needs from a marketing and sales standpoint. So they definitely come into play. There are also related jobs that I didn't mention. So in other words, you're trying to get a core job done, but you may be trying to get other jobs done at the same time. So we often look at that possible scenario to see if there are other jobs people are trying to get done while they're getting the core job done. And so those are in addition to what we've talked about already.
Okay, great. One other question. Do you always use minimize, and if so, why?
Okay. Yes, we always use minimize. And as I mentioned, we tested different variations of that statement: reduce, decrease, prevent, eliminate. I know they all sound similar, but they actually get rated very differently for importance and satisfaction in a survey. And so rather than having variation on a term, we picked a term that we felt denoted exactly what we're trying to accomplish and what the customer is trying to accomplish in a situation. And that's to minimize the likelihood that something will happen or the time it takes to do something. And it's interesting, if you just think through this very quickly, if it were to say, eliminate the time it takes to do something, that may not be that important, right? But minimizing the time might be more important. So eliminating it down to zero, you get different ratings for importance and satisfaction, and it doesn't reveal the opportunities correctly. So that's just one example.
Okay. One last question. What are acceptable metric terms?
So the metrics that we're using most frequently are time and likelihood. And that's the likelihood of something going wrong due to X. It's almost like cause and effect kind of thinking. And, minimize the time it takes to achieve a particular goal. If you just stick with those two terms, you'll be pretty safe. And again, the rationale behind that is the way to get a job done better is to get it done faster, more predictably, higher output throughput, and those two metrics work in those situations.
Okay, great. Thanks.
Okay, excellent. So let's talk about the fun part here is how do you translate what you already have into these statements. And this is something that we've been working with our clients on over the past couple of years to help take what they already have and translate it into something useful. Obviously, organizations have great pockets of knowledge, insight. They've spent lots of money on qualitative and quantitative research. And the way we like doing this is to get a team of your employees in a room with a facilitator for a day or 2 days. It often takes a couple of days. And take all this information and start organizing it around these three big buckets like we talked about, the functional metrics, the financial metrics, the consumption metrics, and start building out the model. And I'm going to show you how we do that here in a second. But I think the important thing on this slide here is to describe how do we do it and what's the involvement of customers, if any. So there's a few variations here. One scenario is, and I'll just use an example. We worked with a medical device company recently that had gone out over the last year and conducted about 30 ethnographic interviews with their research team. So they really had some great in-depth knowledge of what the customers are looking for. But again, they felt like they didn't have a good set of needs, a solid set of outcome statements. So in this case, they had great knowledge internally. And we simply sat with that team, the internal team, no external customers, and went through and created the model, created the job map, created the outcome set, and so on. Again, I'll explain that in a minute. And once we created that internally, we took that completed set of needs out to other surgeons in the end, other customers, and had them validate it and fine-tune it. And we ended up in a very short period of time, because it just took a couple of days to do that translation. Later in the week, we did interviews with other surgeons. And by the end of the week, they had what they felt was a very complete set of customer needs statements. They went out to prioritize that in the survey to find which needs were unmet. But the key thing there is they had that knowledge internally. They felt comfortable with it. They didn't feel the need to have customers in the room during the translation period. In other situations, that's not the case, where maybe a team is less confident in their ability to understand what the customer's needs are. Maybe they've conducted less research or a little research. And in cases like that, we often recommend that customers are actually in the room at the same time. And we go through the translation process with the customer's help. So the customers can help keep a team on track during the approach. And again, once that session is done, a day, day and a half, 2 days, those completed needs statements can go out to another group of customers for validation and refinement prior to being quantified in the survey. So I think those are some of the key variations on the theme. But it's been very successful work with clients just taking what they have internally and translating it into some set of needs very quickly. And the goal of the session is to define the customer's job to be done. That's the first thing. Then to define the job map for each of those three groups of people, the functional, the financial, the consumption chain. So there's going to be 3 different job maps. And define the outcome statements for each step in the job map. And then, as I mentioned, repeat the same cycle for the executor, the buyer, and the product lifecycle support teams. So what I've done here is I want to lay out some examples of how this gets structured in a formal setting. But this slide here shows what we're trying to accomplish. This is the hierarchy of what we're trying to create. At a high level, we've got the highest level, we have the job the customer's trying to get done. That's the jobs. then we have all the job steps that are associated with getting that job done. And then we have all these desired outcome statements sitting underneath each step. So in a typical job, there might be 50 to 150 different outcomes that people use to measure success and value when getting the job done. And we approach it in this fashion because this is a very systematic way to take what you already have and to structure it into something that's very useful. So we start building this out. So let's start with the job map. The job map, and we have a pretty good article in our HBR back in 2008 that explains this in more detail. But the job map helps us lay out all the steps that the customer is trying to get done as they are executing the job. And a job map is not the same thing as a customer journey map. It's not a process map. And the key difference here is a job map lays out what the customer is trying to do in the order, in the optimal order in which they should be doing it. If you think about it as a ideal process map, that would be a more accurate way of thinking about it, where there's planning steps up front, we locate the inputs, we organize them, we confirm everything will work, we execute the job, monitor the execution, make modifications, and conclude. And we like using this music example, simple example here, as a good overview of a job map. Very simple, right? We assess the situation to see, do we need music for 5 minutes because we're going to relax and go to sleep, or do we need music for 3 hours because we're hosting an event? And then we gather the music, we organize it in the order in which we want to hear it, we confirm everything is set, we actually listen to the music, monitor the experience, make some modifications as we go, and conclude. Now, the reason we like the job map, of course, is because it gives us structure around which we can define our customer needs and organize the insights that we already have. Those needs are going to relate to each of these steps in the job because this is the job that the customer is trying to get done. In some of the sessions, we'll see that our clients are very strong at certain steps in the job and they really understand them very well, but they might be weak in others. And so this is always interesting. It's a great learning experience. And if you find that you're weak in a certain area, that's where you go get some external customer input to fill in the gaps and make sure we've got a complete set of needs that, again, will look something like this. So this is the goal, is to build out this model. And the job map, again, the first step. So let me give you some examples here. I want to go through 4 different examples. And the first one here is for a medical device product. So it's from the medical industry. And there are 3 sets of needs that we're going to structure. One is around the purchase decision maker. In this market, the buyer is not the user, right? The buyer is a buying group, typically working for the hospital, and they're making the purchase decision. And what they're doing is they're going through the buying process. Right? So we can create a job map for the buying process, and the buying process always looks pretty similar. There are different criteria for making the purchase decision. Those are the financial metrics. They prioritize those metrics to decide which ones are more important to them in a given situation. They evaluate the alternative solutions, and they select and make the purchase. Now, when they're going through this process, they have a set of financial metrics that they're using to measure or to decide if product A is better than product B. So minimize the patient's length of stay in the hospital, for example, or the overall cost of the product purchase, or the time it takes to complete the purchase, or the likelihood that the patient returns due to recurrence, or minimize the carrying cost. Now, you notice in these outcomes here, we're a bit more lenient in terms of what we're measuring and controlling. It's not always time and likelihood. It's often cost. It's a cost-related outcome. And cost-related outcomes can be time or likelihood because they can be costly things, but they also come in like patient's length of stay, for example. That's a metric that hospitals use to decide if one product's better than another, because if it can reduce the length of stay, that's reducing their cost, and that's a metric that they use to make that purchase decision. So you're going to see that, in each of these cases there's nuances, but the overall rules hold steady as you go through each of the examples. This is the second part here. These are along the customer journey. The product has to be received, stored, prepared for use, maintained, repaired, sterilized, replaced, disposed. all these elements are touch point, elements inside the customer experience that have to be addressed by the product or service. And there are functional outcomes that the surgical care team use to measure success in getting the job done. And then they say they want to minimize the time it takes to prepare the device for the surgeon's use, or minimize the likelihood that using the device causes muscle fatigue, or so on. So they're going to have their own set of metrics that will define value from the perspective of this customer experience. And then, of course, there's the core customer, which in this case is the surgeon. And the surgeon's job here was to repair a rotator cuff. That's the core functional job that they're trying to get done. And their job map, they want to assess the damaged tissue, finalize the repair plan, verify the repair is secure, resolve repair problems, and so on. And as they're going through and getting that job done, they are using a certain set of metrics to decide if the job is getting done perfectly or not. They're trying to minimize the time it takes to determine how much tissue should be removed, or to determine the points of fixation for attachment, or the likelihood that the securing mechanism pulls out of the tendon while it's being secured, or so on. Very specific metrics that they're using to say that this job is being executed effectively. So the thing I want you to notice here is that we're using this structure to get things started, right? So the structure is there are financial metrics for the purchase decision maker. There's functional metrics along the customer journey. And then for the person actually using the product to get the core job done, there's a set of functional outcomes as well. And then what we layer on top of all this are the emotional jobs that Melissa had mentioned earlier that come into play. Once we think about each of these other areas, we think about emotional jobs, we think about related jobs, and this gives us a very full picture of how to organize our customer needs. So this is the goal. So when we sit down with a team, our goal is to organize the outcomes in this fashion. Now I'll just go through some other examples here just to get you in the rhythm of what we're trying to accomplish here so it becomes more obvious. So this here is a cleaning product. It's a product that is used to clean granite in the home. And again, there's a purchase decision maker, and then there are the touch points that are along the way, and then you actually use it to clean granite. So we're going to study each of those separately and organize the outcomes around these categories. So notice again, acquiring the cleaning product is the buying process, right? So they're figuring out what criteria to use to make the buying decision, prioritize them, evaluate options, and select and purchase the product. And they're going to have a set of financial outcomes that they use to measure success when buying the product. Minimize the cost of disposing of the product packaging. Minimize the likelihood that the product causes negative health side effects. Minimize the likelihood that the product will expire before it's completely used. These are some of the financial metrics that they would use that impact their cost in their buying decision. And of course, once that product is purchased, it makes its way into the home. And someone has to bring it home, dispose of the packaging material, store it, prepare it for use, learn how to use it, interact with the product, restore it, dispose of the product. So all these elements come into play during the life cycle as well. And there are functional outcomes associated with each of those steps in getting the job done. So again, when you're sitting with your team and going through this exercise, you're organizing it first into these three big buckets, and you're creating a job map for each and figuring out where these insights go and how they fit in the grand scheme of things. And the third piece here is the functional job user. Who is the user? And this is the person polishing the granite surface. And that's the job, the core functional job of the product. They prepare the surface, supply the product, polish the dull surface, assess their progress, complete the work, and clean up. And they have a set of functional metrics that they're using to measure success and value when getting the job done. Minimizing the time it takes to prepare the surface for polishing, minimize the likelihood of scratching the surface when polishing it, minimize the time it takes to remove residue on the surface that's left by the product. So again, very specific, detailed needs in a language that's consistent with the way customers think and in a language that's useful for the product marketing, development, R&D team. Again, emotional jobs and related jobs can be attached to each of these customer types as well. Let's pick a third one here. This one comes in the manufacturing space. This is production controllers that are used on a production line to help control process flow. Think of this as something that's controlling the flow of oil and gas being processed through a production facility, for example. And here again, you have the purchase decision maker who is going through the buying process. And they're looking for the financial criteria, they're evaluating, and they're making the purchase decision. Now, what you notice here, because we're showing this for the third time now, is that in every market, there's a buyer who's going through the buying process. And what I see happen often is that companies confuse the buying process with the core functional job. The buying process is something that has to happen in every market. But the core functional job created for the user over there is really the key thing, and that's where the product innovation comes from. So confusing these and confusing the buyer with the user and mixing them all together often makes it really hard to understand how to create value and how to really think through the equation. Again, here you see financial-based outcomes, the cost of production, minimize yield loss, minimize the cost of rework, labor costs, cost of repair, all financial in nature, once again. And although they're very different than the ones you saw before, right? In every case, each industry we see there's their own language of how they are evaluating cost, their own metrics that they use to evaluate cost. In this case here, too, we have the operator of the controlling device, and this person's monitoring the alarms, they're reporting feedstock variations, other process variations, they're shutting down the line if necessary, restarting it, and they have a set of outcomes that they are focused on that are functional in nature. And then you have the actual user of the product. This is the process engineer. This is the person who's responsible for controlling the inputs and outputs of that process, and they, in essence, hire the controller to make this happen. So they're trying to figure out what product input variations exist, determine the process flow, identify causes of variation and resolving them, and so on. And again, they have functional outcomes that they're using to measure success when getting the job done, such as minimize the time it takes to determine the material composition that will optimize output, for example. Again, very specific metrics that resonate with the customer and that are measurable and controllable in the design of the controller itself and the product, and inputs that can be used by the entire organization. Okay, so I think you get the idea of the structure. And we'll just give one more quick example. This is siding for a home. So here you have the purchase decision maker, might be the builder, may not be the homeowner if it's a new home, and there's financial metrics that they're using to measure value, like minimizing the cost of masking irregularities in the house framing, or minimize the cost of installing the siding on the home exterior, time it takes to complete the installation, and so on. And of course, then you have the installer who has to actually install the siding. So they have to prepare the home exterior, put the siding materials in place, attach the siding to the substrate, clean up, and so on. And they have a set of functional metrics that they use to measure value. And then the actual user is the homeowner who ends up with the house, and they're using this product to protect the home exterior. This is the functional value of the product. And they have a set of outcomes that they're using to measure success and value, minimizing the likelihood that water enters the substructure when it rains, for example, or minimize the likelihood that water infiltrates the substructure through siding seams and butt joints, for example. So again, very specific set of needs. But the lesson that we're trying to put out here today is that you can't sit with your teams and structure what you know into this format. Take everything you have and start thinking about the buyer, the user, and the customers who are along the way on the customer journey, and separate them all out and start organizing your outcome statements around those specific categories of customer type. And doing that, of course, will give you this complete picture. That's the goal. So you want this kind of picture for the buyer, for the end user, for anyone in the consumption chain. And this gives you the complete picture. the goal here is you're trying to create a predictive model or an asset for the long term. Because these need statements are stable over time, once you capture them, you've captured them. You don't have to recapture them next year or the year later. These outcomes are stable over decades. So as you look at, for example, these outcomes on listening to music, same outcomes that were valid last year, the year before, were valid 10 years ago, and they'll be valid 5 years from now. And the reason is we've defined these outcomes as constants in the equation and defined them around a job that people are trying to get done. And because that job is stable over time, these outcomes are stable over time as well. So once you've created this model, you can start testing different technologies and ideas against all these different metrics to see if the buyer will buy it, if the user will use it, and if those in the consumption chain will find it easier to use from an installation, maintenance standpoint, and so on. So I think that's it. So what we do then is we offer these workshops that I've described. You're trying to become more customer-centric. You have a lot of information that's in the minds of your team members, and you're trying to figure out how to organize it and structure it in a way that was going to be valuable to the team and to the organization over the long term. And we've put this offering together, and it's been effective because it's quick. It's a couple of days. It's inexpensive compared to all the research that's already been done. It results in a complete set of actionable need statements. And I think more importantly, success is not dependent on employees becoming customer research experts. And I think that's what part of the problem is to begin with. Expecting that to be the case, it's very hard to make that work. And these results drive market and product strategy. And lastly, the approach builds consensus. I love asking the question, have you ever worked on a project in your career where you've known all the customer's needs? Or do you know anyone that has? Or, does your organization know all the customer's needs? And chances are you'd say, no, I've never worked on a project in my career where I've known all the needs. And on the things we're working on today, we don't know all the needs. There's no one person that knows all the needs. Let's flip this around and say, the goal of all this is to make sure that all of you know all the customer's needs. And that dramatically changes, your view of the market and the way you can innovate, because now you have insights and agreement on something that's going to align the organization around the creation of customer value. And that's really what all this is about. So again, we try to solve this big equation, come up with solutions that address unmet needs by understanding what a need is and defining it in a language that's suitable across the organization. We can make some great progress. So I'll stop there. Melissa, do we have any time for questions?
I don't know that we do. It's just about the top of the hour, but we're certainly happy to answer them. I know we've had some great ones. And please feel free to submit them to me, Melissa@Strategyn.com, or call me directly, 855-584-2212, and we'll get everything answered for you. And Tony, thank you so much. We've gotten great feedback throughout the session today and how interesting and valuable this information's been. So thank you so much.
Oh, my pleasure. Thanks again for your time.
Thank you, everyone.